Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi there,
How
Ross.
are you? Hi, how
Hi
is
there.
everyone?
Fine, we're all well. Good to see you again.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, just getting ready to start our thing there. I think Pamela is one person who's got a lot of homework to do, I think, and to submit it, I think, today, tomorrow. So she's going to be not with us.
Oh, what is she?
So I told her I'm going to be sending her the... Okay, we've got somebody else over here. Who's this? We haven't got your name. Okay, hello Tessa. Good to see you back again.
Hi.
Okay, we've got Slowmit's iPad.
Hi.
Okay, welcome. Yeah, we haven't seen you there before.
No.
Okay, good. What we'll do is it's sort of 3 o'clock, so we might as well start a prayer on time.
Can we mute everyone, please?
Oh yeah, I keep forgetting about that. We'll do that right now. Participants.
You have to come out of screen share,
Hi,
Shafiq.
Sorry?
You have to come out of screen share to do it, I think.
Yeah, I can see how to do it now. So yeah. Mute all. Everybody's muted. There we go. Okay, what I intend to do today is the last two lectures have been the update on technology and an update on the last one that we did, and now it's going to be covering the global sort of scene. Of course, because the picture is very big and wide, we're going to cover only parts of it. So let's go and see what we are going to be having on our agenda today. And that's this. So where do we stand on some of these global concerns that are very much now become part of our lives as well? And we know from all the talks we hear on the TV and on the radio and so on, there is a very heavy cost to be paid in human terms. You know, a lot of deaths have taken place. I'll show you some details on that. And of course, the health management issue, which I think is vital for concerns with the human cost. And of course, this has got to be played against the economic cost, which the government is very much keen on pursuing, so that the economy gets going, and the burden on the government of having to support the people through furloughs and grants and loans and so on for businesses, that needs to be somehow curtailed sooner or later. So there is that element to it as well in terms of economic costs. And what we are going to be talking a little bit more today is on the world health. Because if you're talking about a global issue like the pandemic, we need to have a global sort of institution that takes the lead. And of course, we are seeing that the World Health Organization has been sort of, not in some people's views, not done its job. And of course, USA is foremost in accusing WHO of partiality and so on. And they're also sort of taking USA out of the WHO, which I think is a very wrong thing to do. Nevertheless, we'll see what the WHO actually does. And then, of course, with all the pandemic having such enormous costs on society, on businesses, economy, and health, nevertheless, there is this element that is, again, very much coming to the fore, which is the geopolitics. How do countries respond to each other in terms of the alignment? Now, we saw also that, we are moving away from the multilateral type of approach that has been the hallmark of the post-World War II type of signatories and the world, to something now which is, if you like, go it alone type of idea. And we'll see what the impact of this go it alone is doing to the world. So let's go into it and see. Okay, Now, what are the priorities for the post-pandemic world? Well, obviously, it is going to be people and the inequality that exists, and of course, the climate. These are two very fundamental sort of aspects of a global nature that needs to be addressed. And to address that, you need to rely on the institutions that are global. And if there aren't some that are doing their job, maybe create new ones. As we saw at the end of the Second World War, they got together and said, look, no more future wars, which was a fantastic sort of aspiration. And they created the institutions to support that vision. And that vision was of free markets. And of course, all these UN type of bodies, international institutions, which have looked at the issues facing the world in a holistic fashion, in a global fashion. It is not just national institutions that have been built up, but rather these are the institutions that are going to be doing the work for the global sort of well-being. And we had, of course, the UN, the Security Council, and the full UN body, the WHO, just to name a few, very important for our sort of situation right now, concerned with health. WTO, that's the World Trading Organization, which again is vital for the economic well-being of the world. Because right now we are headed towards trade wars and tariffs and so on. And that has become, I think, really a step backwards. Now, you may remember that when Obama left, he was very keen on these pacts called TPP and TIPP, you know, those type of things, which are transatlantic trade pacts. And the Far East one, the Pacific one, the TPP is the Pacific one. And he was well on the way to trying and getting them established. But come the new sort of regime in USA, they abandoned both of them, which I think is, again, in conformity with policy of USA now, which is to go it alone, America first, you know, put up walls and that type of thinking. So these two things are right now very, very important, the WHO and WTO. Of course, these are the financial bodies that took care of funding for for reconstruction, if you like, the Marshall Plan after the World War II. And therefore, these priorities actually that were set seem to have worked very well and made the world a much richer and a much more equitable place to a large extent, despite the fact there are a lot of disparities, we all accept that. So what we have to do now is to look at and see what are the priorities for us now for this post-pandemic world. And the first thing, instead of saying no wars, we have to say no pandemics. That's a very important type of common, if you like, vision that we can all sort of aspire towards so that future pandemics are dealt with. And from the talk that we hear nowadays, this is not the last one. It could be that we may be faced with other pandemics, you know, on its heels, because these sort of these sort of viruses mutate and change, and we can't keep up, you know, quick enough. Even our COVID-19 is changing, you know, fairly fast, and we don't know whether the vaccines that we're coming up with is going to sort of deal with all the COVID-19 type of mutations that are taking place. So that's something that we have to go. And because it's a sort of a global issue, we have to do it at a global level. Although every country is going it alone to a large extent, which I think probably is not the best way to deal with it, because there has not, well, we are dealing with it because there's no global leadership at the moment. That's why we are failing to sort of come together I remember Gordon Brown saying when the pandemic started, because he was one of those people who dealt with the financial crisis of 2008 and did a very good job and sort of staved off the big sort of calamities. Now he himself is saying we need a leadership, and there isn't anybody, coming forward. So that's a very big sort of disadvantage in our present situation. So, so what we've got to do, apart from the new pandemics, is to stop the current spread of it, which every country is now sort of adopting its own type of formula to proceed with it. And this question of vaccines for the whole world, that is also very questionable at the moment, because this big pharma is really very influential in lobbying governments in order to try and make big bucks out of this. So we need to also come together to say, look, if vaccines are going to be made, they've got to be made so that the world is provided at an affordable cost. And that is something which is very, very important. And for that, agreement has got to be done at the international level as well. So you can see the value of international institutions when it comes to a global situation like this. And of course, the developing countries are being hit very badly. Now, the numbers that are coming out from those countries, we'll show you some more detail later on, are smaller compared to the Western sort of economies. That's mainly because they haven't done enough tests. Now, even in our countries, I think we don't do enough tests. Some of the countries that do an enormous amount of tests are the ones that come out with lots of numbers of how many infections they've had in their country. So in a way, the true cost of measuring this is really on the death count. What was the death a year ago compared to what is the death sort of figures today? And if you see a big difference there, then that is accountable to coronavirus, because it's quite a complicated question as to establish what is the reason why somebody died. So these statistics that we hear are a little bit questionable in my view anyway. Anyway, the other way that we need to sort of deal with as a priority is to reform the WHO towards delivering a global health. Because right now, as somebody said, the budget of a WHO is the equivalent of a large hospital in the USA. I mean, it's shocking to know that it's so underfunded. So you can see the amount of money those people have in WHO is hardly anything except to probably, keep track of what is happening in different countries, be a little secretariat, that's about all, without being proactive and being able to do things which would be very, very sort of helpful to try and stave off some of the pandemics and the viruses that have come our way. One idea, of course, we'll go into a bit more detail as to what the WHO does later on, is to sort of try and merge the global funding that is there. There's billions of dollars out there for various programs which don't necessarily get controlled by WHO. They get their own sort of funding, they do their work. And so one of the ideas of reform here is to try and put all these things together so WHO has a lot more funds at its disposal. So let's see what's going to happen. Okay, what is the impact on the national economies of the world? If you look at it in a global sense, what we have is the current markets are not suitable for the pandemic. We've seen that because we saw that in emergencies, the markets have not been able to deliver the masks, for instance, or for that matter, the sanitizers, or the PPE, for the staff of NHS and so on. So wholly unprepared if you leave it just to the economic, the corporate world to try and bring about, adequate sort of goods and services available. It needs to have government action. So only governments can take action. Um, because here governments are much more concerned about health and the security of people and the economic well-being. Corporate world is not. Corporate world is interested in their shareholders, and they want to be able to look at the quarterly results and see whether they're doing badly or well. So what we need is, on the economic policy issues, we need to have something which is going to be responsive to pandemics quickly enough. And at the national level, also government should take action to strengthen the institutions that can deliver that. And of course, globally, it should go for a multilateral action, which we know can be delivered through the multilateral organization institutions we have. And one of them is WHO. Okay, for all this expenditure, how are we going to be funding it? We all know that government has borrowed quite a lot, and we're all very pleased that they have been borrowing, at a very short notice, huge amounts of money, and that has kept the people, as it were, still on the payroll, but at home. So no work has been done. Government has picked up the burden of being able to deliver up to about 80% of furlough costs. And then of course, businesses have been given grants and loans. So they have done, I think, a good job, but it's a matter of seeing how long they can continue doing this. We are all sort of hoping that a vaccine will come very quickly and we'll go back to normal. But from what I can make out, I don't think the vaccine is going to come, very, very quickly. Secondly, even if it comes in, people are not going to be immediately getting back to their ways of what it was before pandemic. So it's going to take a while. So it's not going to be a V type of, if you like, growth, but rather much more, slower growth. And the funding, of course, has got to be of these levels that we have seen. Already before the pandemic, we were having quite a high GDP to debt to GDP ratio. Now we're going to be nearing 100%. Some countries have gone even beyond 100%. And it's going to be quite a task to be able to see how we're going to balance the books sooner or later. And one way, of course, is to sort of defer it for future generations to pay. Now, when World War II borrowings took place, it took, decades to pay back the loan. And I think we will probably have to do the same thing as far as this debt that we are accumulating because of the rescue packages and the stimulus that governments are providing to their economies and to their public. And the immediate thing that people have talked about it is, let's catch the higher, earners and tax them, get hold of the corporations that are stashing up money in these Cayman Island types of places, tax havens. But then, it's not so easy to be able to try and all of a sudden shut down these tax havens. You could say that, for instance, right now, Ireland is doing exceedingly well because Apple and all these high-tech companies are having their head offices there, and they have accumulated a huge amount of cash reserves, which they have got stashed away somewhere, but they're not paying the taxes. In fact, the EU, I think even the court has said they've got to pay, I think Apple to pay 13 billion. And Apple is appealing, and I think it's going to be a question of seeing, and of course, Ireland is with Apple. They're saying, no, because what the court said is that the 13 billion should be paid to Ireland. So Ireland is saying, no, we don't really want it. We'd rather have Apple than the 13 billion, because that policy that they've adopted of lower corporate tax and all that is paying them very high dividends. So in a way, all this money has got to be somehow brought back into the taxable into the government pockets. It's a big job. I'm not sure how they're going to do it. We are still sort of waiting to see what the sort of grand plan is. Okay, what is the impact on globalization? Because globalization, as I've said before, just to sort of recap a little bit, globalization one has been really the trade between countries, going back, centuries. Globalization two is actually the trade between corporate worlds in every country. So corporations were dealing with each other, are not just countries to country. And we are now in globalization three, which has to do with trade between individuals all over the world. I can sort of do an order with China and buy something, whatever it may be, and they get paid. So individuals are able to transact. So we have going from country to corporate world to individuals. So we had now this globalization. Because of pandemic, there's going to be some impact, because what we saw the impact was on the supply chains, because the supply chain, sorry for the spelling here, the supply chains have been were quite dispersed. Because of internet, they were linked up very nicely all over the world. And if you pick up an item at, say, Walmart, it's the source, the factory, or even the mine that sort of was in providing the raw material would get to know about it, and they would start straight away working away. Very, very responsive type of supply chains we had. And because pandemic has brought about a disruption in that, so the thinking has got to be that there's got to be a change to that supply chain. It shouldn't be as extensive and global as it was before, but now it should be a little bit closer to home and maybe regional at best, and so on. So what is the impact of that going to be on the globe? Well, they all say that trade is going to diminish, which I think makes for, basically from the readings that we make, people are not traveling, they're not, consuming that much as they would normally. Of course, I'm not talking about food. I'm talking about all the other stuff that we, buy, the entertainment, or, whatever it is that the normal life is made up of. So trade in that sense is going to diminish quite a bit. That's what they're saying, all these bodies. But digital flows are going to increase. Now, what do you mean by that? Well, a digital flow is really a way of being able to provide services, even if you're sitting there and half the way across the world. We saw that part of the globalization, and because the internet had these accessibility, people were able to deliver services from wherever they were. Now that is on the increase now, because a lot of people are now becoming bigger users of technology to be able to deliver the services that they normally would. Normally, we would go to our offices and be able to sit down on our desk and do our job and then come back home. But now, because of the pandemic, we are asked to stay home and do the work from there. And very quickly we can extrapolate as to what that would mean, because it means basically that companies are not going to say, well, just you don't have to be on the other side of London to come over or deliver the service. We can go to the other side of the Atlantic or to Asia for getting the same service. So you can see that it is going to add to the outsourcing type of phenomena that we saw when we had those big pipes connecting, the West economies to the poorer countries in the Eastern, in Asia and so elsewhere. So that and that automation also resulted in a lot of job losses, and so jobs are going to be also impacted because of the digital flows, because the digital flow means just not working from home, but also from another country as well. Now, also another feature is that the old idea of going to the low-cost countries for getting your goods made is now becoming less attractive. And why is that? Because of automation. You see, now, if you have these low-cost countries producing goods, their costs are also rising. And therefore, a lot of companies are now looking at automation to see whether they can bring back those types of work back into the countries, and by spending a lot more on automation. An example of that we saw is this Tesla car, right? We saw in our earlier lectures when Tesla was building these gigafactories. They don't call it a they call it a big machine. It's a big machine producing little machines, which are cars. Now they're all sourced practically, within the country. Very, very fewer components compared to the normal ICE cars, the internal combustion engine cars. So the number of components required in an electric car is far fewer and can be sourced locally, and therefore the automation becomes a very highly prized part of manufacturing, which is going to reduce costs for them. Another thing that has been prior to the pandemic was the rise in nationalism. We saw that, the fact that Trump came in and you got this Penn doing well and Kurt Wilders and all these people, and even Brexit to a large extent is a sort of a type of protectionism. And that has come about not because of the pandemic, but it started already because of this automation and outsourcing of work to the other countries through globalization. See? So this loss of jobs has made for a move to the right. And of course, the wars and all that have created a lot of instability, and migrations have come in, and that was a good excuse for these right-wing parties to make that as the big culprit, which is not true. And what's another sort of impact of this this globalization and supply chains is, again, this protectionism, nationalism is bringing about trade wars. And now we are already seeing between China and USA. Do a bit more of that later. Okay, now if you don't act globally in a multilateral fashion, what is the failure going to lead to? Well, we can see that it's going to lead to new pandemics. Then it's going to be lots of social issues, job losses, inequality is going to increase. And then political tensions will arise as well, which we are already seeing is happening. And that means that we are going to move into these Cold War type of situations you may have heard on the news being mentioned, and the formation of new political alliances. And I'll give you an example of this. China and Iran, which just concluded a very long-term sort of deal. And we'll talk about that more later. Okay, just a comment about this thing about if you're going to be putting up walls, which is the famous phrase of Trump, he wants to sort of keep people out and all sorts of things out. A comment on this is, of course, they cannot stop the pandemics. They cannot stop the climate change. They cannot stop these antibiotic resistance, which is also going to be, a big threat to us as human beings on the horizon. But it does stop free flow of ideas and goods and services. We have come out of this to begin with by coming out of Brexit, for instance, because you remember the European Union has these 4 pillars which it considers to be, untouchable. One is the free flow of goods, of services, of manpower, and of finances. And we didn't subscribe to that, and we're out of it. But it's very, very important to have this if you're going to have an international upliftment and not just go it alone type of idea. Okay, there must be lots of opportunities coming out of this pandemic as well. We shouldn't forget that, globally we need to look at that. And we can see it is a splendid time to look at green policies, because green policies means we also address the issues of climate and renewables, of course. And if research and all that is happening, that is for the whole species, as not just the human beings, but all species. So the green policy can be made in such a way that it can be conditional, and the grants and loans can be conditional to the loans they get, by introducing the green policies in their makeup. One example, of course, we can see is that if they go for alternative energies or batteries or what have you, or solar panels, that could be a good incentive for builders and so on. So green policies can be introduced so that we attain this flattening of the climate curve, because that is increasing. You see, the warming is increasing, and if we go above the 1.5 to 2% limit that they have agreed that they will adhere to, then a lot of species are going to die. Forests are going to disappear. So it's a humongously sort of bad decision if you don't take advantage of this opportunity right now, because people are much more amenable to change. Because we have seen a threat which is a common to the whole world. It's like the old days of Martians attacking Earth. The whole world gets together. We have a common enemy. So we have a common enemy in the pandemic now. So people are much more amenable to change. They will bring about the change. So I don't think we need to think that there's going to be a lot of resistance if it's done the right way. Now, opportunities also on this infrastructure. We talk about HS2 here. Glad that this government didn't cancel it, although it's going to be humongously expensive. Despite the fact China says we'll do it for half the price, which is interesting. So we need to have infrastructure to get the businesses going. That's already happening in Asia. And we've talked about the Belt and Road, which is the Belt and Road Initiative. And that's impacting Africa and Asia in a big way. And we'll talk a little bit more later. And for all that, the opportunity for multilateral. I mean, there's nothing wrong in going multilateral. It just means that you need to get together some like-minded people and come up with ideas and pursue them jointly. Okay, this government has dealt with the priority when it came to fighting the COVID has been to make this is the health system capacity, see? And they thought that with this, if they don't take any actions, it's going to be completely inundated with, with patients. So their first priority was to not have this bulge happening. So they wanted to have the flattening of that curve to something which was capable of being dealt with the healthcare system, which they have done, in fact. They did that by lockdowns and by all sorts of measures which we all hear about. They banned large gatherings and restrictions on travel, then all these things about curfews, schools, companies, doing their furloughs, working from outside, downsizing workforces to be able to afford it, working hours. So all these measures were taken to try and keep that thing down. See, that has been uppermost. Now the next thing is to try and get that economic activity going up. So that's where the government is headed that way. Okay, here a little bit about the WHO, because we think that the pandemic is such a big issue for the whole world. We need to strengthen the WHO. Now let's see, what is the WHO? It is one of those things that has this, okay, I'll just move this so that we can, okay, see the whole thing. There's something called the SDGs. These are Sustainable Development Goals. They defined that in 2015 and adopted by the member states of the UN, that by 2030, we should attain these goals. And what are these goals? Just move that thing there. There are 17 goals designed to be blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. I think a very laudable thing, and I think we should all aspire to this. And that was about 5 years ago. And they put the target for 2030, and it has been there. And what are those 17 things? These are the ones, the goals. They wanted to achieve no poverty, zero hunger. I don't think anybody would sort of disagree with any of these. Good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, reducing inequality, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, save all the life there, life on land, look after the species, peace, justice, and strong institution, partnerships for the. So you can see such fantastic aspirations. And these have got to be made as one of those important things. We need to bring it back to high priority items at a global level when we talk about coming out of the pandemic, so that we can then address these issues along with the green policies and then go at it, and not necessarily give a free hand to the corporate world saying, okay, we'll give you money, we'll rescue you, but you go ahead and do your bad old ways, whichever you think is possible, which is good for you. So I think that's like ostrich type of thinking. We need to put conditions on all these stimulus and rescue packages we are giving to everybody. Now, who's funding the WHO? Biggest is the USA, then China, 57 million, Japan, Germany, all the rich countries here. So they're not sort of biggest contributor is 24. So US is pulling out now. And of course, that is one of those things that is a step in the wrong direction. And we just hope that by November, we get a new president and he's going to turn everything undo everything that Trump has done. Okay, so WHO reform drivers, governance has got to be, strengthened. They don't have enough money. They need to sort of get further funding, and where do they can get it from? As I said, there are other funds that are not part of WHO, but who have a lot of money and which can be made part of WHO to give them more strength. And there are private people as well who do the like Gates Foundation. So that type of funding is also possible. So it's a question of being able to have the political will to do it. So in the past, this has been, this is going forward, we need to create qualified employment opportunities. So WHO subscribes upscale the domestic and international financing, stronger institutions, dramatic improvements in efficiency, horizon scanning. So all these things are going forward, we need to address coming out of this pandemic. Okay, this is another way of looking at it as to what the WHO actually does. When it comes to poverty, they need to implement nationally appropriate social protection systems and measures for, including by 2030, and achieve substantial coverage of the poor and the vulnerable. The same thing applies for nutrition, education, gender equality, and employment. So you've got very, very, again, broadly speaking, vision of where we should be headed. And we shouldn't forget that, because it's very, very easy for us to forget our immediate problems and say, look, I haven't got a job, and forget about what we need to do at a global level. So it's very important to keep these things in mind, that we've got institutions which have good programs, which need funding and need leadership. That's what we need. Okay, this is basically saying that the different parts of the health provisions need to be brought together under one thing for the WHO to be but more efficient. Okay, well, let's skip that. We've already done that one. Okay, spending. Now, this blue line tells you how much the government spends on health. See, in case of Cuba, it's got the best health system from, and you can see they spend, most of it government and then a little bit of out of pocket, which means the people themselves have to pay, which is very little. See, Britain, we've got an NHS. Of course, we have a lot of funding from government, and this black thing is the prepaid private. This is the private schemes, and then of course the other ones that we pay directly. China is also doing a fair amount of spending, up to 60% of that care system. United States, although being the richest and advanced country, has got a pretty bad system. From you look at that, most of the money, a lot of money is not coming from there, but rather from these private insurance schemes and out-of-pocket type of things. So as you go down the thing there, you see poorer countries, they spend very little. They don't have the money to begin with anyway. So they depend a lot on aid that they get, which is this one, development assistance, either dark green. So the poor countries rely on development aid coming their way to try and strengthen their health systems. Okay, this is just saying the same thing in words. Healthcare spending, United States, very high, more than the OECD average, but when it comes to delivering service to everybody, it's very poor. 40 million people are still, I think, uncovered. It was until Obama came, and he brought in for 20 million people coverage. Another 20 million are still out of not having coverage. And so United States is one country which I think is not doing its job on the health side. Okay, we talked about what needs to be done, what are the aspirations, and and what are the sources we can tap and so on. Here, this is the outlook that we can see immediately. Everything is in red here. See, all the countries, they're all having negative growth, including UK here somewhere. Yeah, it's UK here, minus 10. So you've got negative growth rates. The only thing that's positive seems to be in 2021 is China. They are the only ones who seem to be getting back, as it were, economically speaking. Although it's not a very big sort of increase, but yet they're not negative. Okay? So they are well placed to start the economy, global economy going again. Okay, that's another way of saying that 3% smaller in 2050 due to the impact of climate change. So already, this is not taking into account the pandemic, but just to climate change, we're already going to have some impact on the economy. So we need to be able to, giving the global climate, keeping the temperature increased. So this is the increase that we shouldn't go beyond, but we are going to miss that target. That's what, because especially with USA pulling out, I don't think there's any chance. World Economic Outlook here, this update by June. Now these are classed as three categories. Global economy, that's for the whole world. Advanced economies, you see for 2020, we're going to have -8, contraction. Maybe in 2021, we'll go up to 5. Then the emerging market, these are the poorer countries. In 2020, they're going to have -3, contraction, but probably grow a little bit faster in 2021. So we see that this year is going to be bad for the whole world practically. That's the global lowest, figures. And what does it mean in terms of this growth? It means nearly 10 years of progress has been lost. Now we can visualize that. It means that we are going back to the 2010 type of levels. So our 10-year growth has been lost because of this pandemic. Okay, this is the cost in human terms and in coronavirus. Where are we on this? I just thought we might see on the 23rd of July, the United States has got nearly 4 million people who are infected. But these infections, I'm sort of not too happy about because it's a question of how many are tested. So let's not to spend too much time on that one. This is a much more better figure. You see, the United States here has got 4 million infections, but the deaths have been 148,000. So you can see they're moving towards a 5 million infections and 150,000 deaths. Brazil comes next with 85,000 deaths. India, 31. India figures are also a bit suspect because they're not doing enough testing. And UK is down here. I think we are up to the 45 level, 45,000 deaths and about 300,000 infections. So you've got these poorer countries here. These figures are all a little bit suspect, because they're not doing enough testing. Okay, we're not going to be hitting the second peak. Let's talk about that. And we need to be aware that we can't all of a sudden say, well, this is, getting over. But it's in cases like Australia starting, see this 24th of July, that's a couple of days ago, they're starting to peak. Iran was already high, so they haven't come down. Israel has peaked as well, starting to peak. Japan also peaking. So we can't let up now. And it seems to be it's going beyond the earlier levels, see? So that's the danger, which means it's going back to the normal, even worse condition. The UK is here. We haven't showed second peaks here. This is just a daily threat. So the death rate has gone down for UK, but we haven't got figures of the second peak. This is the US. US is the biggest country that has the most severe loss, both in terms of death and also in terms of economy. They've had so many cases, daily case about 60,000 here, and deaths about 1,000 a day, even though it's decreasing somewhat. So these are tremendously high figures, and we are still not even coming out of it. This is just showing it to you where the big sort of peaks are. The same figure again, telling you about the deaths and so on. Okay, how are we going to come out of this? We said earlier on that China is a sort of a country which is already showing a bit of a growth for 2020. They might be able to pull the whole world up again if we get out of this Cold War and trade wars. So they are big manufacturers of all these things. They do all the 8% of auto parts, antibiotics, clothing. These are percentages of global, So they have a fair amount of share in terms of global economy, which they are part of. And if they get going, then we can expect, things to happen. Well, okay, supply chains, I mentioned to you earlier on. You know what a supply chain is? Basically, it's all these things about having to provide for your goods on the shelf that you buy and how they are subsequently end up there on the shelf. And that's all the sort of back end of that business that provides for that. And there are systems that deal with it. And these things are spread all over the world, actually. So you've got the shipping, aircraft, vans moving and packages, so all sorts of, so it's just now this is a picture that's showing us from February to March, how much of the economy in China has started to work again. See, in February, it was a quarter. Here in auto parts is 80% back to normal. For some non-ferrous metals, 85 back to normal. Iron and steel. So you can see these blue curves are showing a fair amount of gain compared to the yellow ones, where the yellow ones are the ones that were at the peak of the pandemic, and things had slowed quite a bit. So you can see the engine of China is getting going. There's another way of saying the same thing. That's just for your reference, because I'm going to be sending you the clip of this recording. Hopefully I'm recording it. Yeah. Okay. That's the same thing. Okay, I bring up this electric cars because I find that we had earlier talks on Tesla and all that. Well, China have got half of the global vehicles are in China. So they're going to catch up with electric vehicles very fast. Okay, we talked about the geopolitics bringing about new alignments. Now, China had made a deal with Iran just last week for a 25-year deal worth about, some say, $600 billion, which is humongous. And that covers telecommunication, infrastructure, ports, whatever you think of, the road building, they're going to be involved with it. And of course, China and Iran in Pakistan already have big projects underway. And I'll just show you a bit of detail as we quickly go. That's the grouping now, but they've got Russia as well now, which is part of that. Now, you remember this Belt and Road thing, I keep mentioning about this. This is the big infrastructure of China that is going to reach out to other parts, to Africa, to Asia and Europe, to bring in resources and also to market their goods. So humongously big sort of project. New Silk Road, it's called. This is the alignments that's taking place. And Iran, because it has got severe sanctions on it, it's down on its knees. And the only country that could come to its rescue is China. Even EU couldn't do it because USA said we'll sanction any company that's based in EU that deals with Iran. So a lot of companies have not lived up to their deal of that JPCO, that agreement they did, nuclear deal with Iran. So the only country that has done something is China, and they've come out, and I think that's going to make a humongous difference to Iran. Yeah, they're going to be building all these pipelines, and of course, Gwadar is another link to China from here. Yeah, let's forget that. There's that link to China from Pakistan. This is one of these corridors, which is moving very, very fast. They're investing 60 billion to build this the highway roads. This Karakorum's highways over here. It's very, very difficult, but they've done it. And now recently, China came into Ladakh. I don't know whether you remember. Ladakh is the area which is of course claimed by both India and China, but China has in fact moved in closer to some vital areas which are important from the point of view of this link, and also from the point of view of the waters that come from this region into the Indus River, because that's the lifeline of the country. So that equation has now changed with that coming of China right at the border of Kashmir now. And of course, Kashmiris are to some extent feeling a little bit safer. because they're still under lockdown. You see, the lockdown has now nearing a year now, which I think India has done a big disservice to itself, apart from doing such a disservice to Kashmiris. That's just the old Silk Road. The BRI, the infrastructure, has this basis of the old Silk Road, which opened up China to Europe and Europe to China. And what it's doing now with the modern sort of Silk Road is this BRI. So Iran is now sort of linking up. And so Iran is now going to have all this type of big projects. It had, in fact, made a deal with India to set up a port right next to Gwadar. But India came under pressure from USA as well, and they started to sort of delay it, and Iran said, okay, we're going to ditch you. And they went with China. So this is the new sort of change. This is just saying the different types of projects that are going to be working on with China. This is a type of trade that China has in the Middle East. And that's, again, another way of depicting how much Asia has nearly 2 trillion of trade with China, and the rest of the world so much. Okay. Okay, I'm going to sort of stop now and be able to simply take on some Q&A. Okay, I'm going to unmute you, as Ross is always there to remind me that. Okay, you're all unmuted now.
Shafiq, there's one thing I want to say. As far as, the deaths are concerned, how is everybody else actually assessing deaths? I mean, we seem to be assessing deaths. If somebody had COVID at the beginning of March or April or whatever it is, and they die from something completely different, they put it down to COVID. That's what I've been reading. And I just don't think everything's being reported properly. How are we supposed to assess what really is going on?
Yeah, well, I think we can only sort of wait for the budget, the Office of the Statistics to come out with figures. But in terms of what is being spent by the government, I think it should be commended for the quickness of response. And although it's big numbers involved, the question is, where does the money come from? The money actually comes from the Bank of England printing the money and being available to the government, which sooner or later has got to sort of balance its book. But it's going to say, well, we'll do it if growth comes back to UK. And if growth comes back to UK, then higher taxes, more taxes will be collected. And that's the reasoning anyway. But then the other question is whether it's about 80%, 90% or 100% of GDP, what it actually means is that the government has got to pay the interest on that. And interest is so low at the moment, so it's like free money for the government. So that's why they're trying to keep the inflation down, they keep the interest rates low, and make sure that the money that they have borrowed does not cost them a lot of money. And they want to sort of now depend on getting some money back from these rich havens, the tax havens, and from the rich people. I don't think they can put up VAT or anything that's going to hit the common man. So we'll have to see how they're going to try and make it a question that it's affordable. Yeah, go ahead, Shlomit.
Right. Hi.
Hi.
First, I want to ask you.
All right, thanks.
You mentioned that the virus is changing. Yeah. So first of all, how do we know that the virus is changing? And then you also said that there is no vaccine. They've said that Oxford has found some sort of a vaccine. So what happened to this vaccine? And then the last thing that you just mentioned between Iran and China, the fact that the West has put a lot of sanctions on China, is it not a bit dangerous with their nuclear capacity that they're now in alliance with, that Iran is now in alliance with China?
Well, you see, the thing about nuclear sort of weapons and so on, I think that agreement was done, which was to try and restrict them and slow them down. And I think that was to a large extent successful until, Trump came along and, tore it up. I think Iran is not serious about going for the nuclear way, but I think under pressure, like even North Korea, they want to keep their nuclear program because they feel that is the only way that they can be protecting themselves. So if there's no trust between governments, they are going to sooner or later rely on their own mechanisms to safeguard themselves. So Iran at the moment is saying, of course, they don't have any program and so on, but with good sort of friendships that they are developing, which is really with China, they're going to not only have an economic sort of tie-up, but I'm sure they'll have a military tie-up as well. So there is going to be that type of protection coming in without having to go for their own nuclear program. What was the other question you had about, the vaccines? Now, from what I can make
also
out...
coming back to Iran, is it not dangerous for the world that China is now, that they're doing business and, is it not because Iran is a bit of a danger?
Well, Iran is, I don't know, I think it has become a danger simply because I think it has been made into that type of role, because if the JCPOC or that nuclear deal was kept intact and another deal was made for the missiles and so on, and a third one for whatever else, that could have been a good way forward. But I don't think USA wanted really to go that way. You see, the US military sort of industrial complex, the money they spend on defense is something like 700-800 billion. And the people who have these poke barrel type of funding by the federal government are from states of the Republican and so on. So the question of having peace, as it were, is not conducive to the war machines that are there. So much so that somebody, I think, and I was looking at the WHO, or some 8% of the total defense budget of the world, if it is spent on health and for well-being of the world, will be so far ahead. But we are still, unfortunately, in the hands of governments which believe in strong arm tactics, and it's the old imperialistic ways, actually, of having to take over. In the old days, it was to be the land and resources of that country. But nowadays, it's the economic tie-ups that essentially means that if your institutions are strong like banks, they can have a big share in the resources of the poorer countries. So we have a model which is which was developed after World War II, which relies on the fact that the capitalistic world or richer world has the advantage. And that is why we have not seen a great amount of a disparity, a removal of disparity. Disparity has increased, although there has been some improvements. And the reason why China has come up is because it has it was isolated to a large extent until about 20, 30 years ago. It started to open up and started exporting, and therefore has made its way up. And now the danger is with this Cold War not turning into a hot war. So we need to be a bit careful about that, unfortunately. Let's see.
Shafiq, sorry, can I interrupt? I hear all of that, but the thing that concerns me is that we've got China and we know how well they're doing, all the rest of it. But there is a big ideological difference now, the China with its communism, etc., and Western Europe with its democracy. And there is obviously a battle going on. China is doing extremely well. And the people, the countries they're taking along with them are all the poor countries. Now, so it's no coincidence that Iran, which is in a big fight with America, is going to go with them, and Russia and Turkey and all these places. So I think it's a bit more than just sort of oh, the West has been bad to China, so China is doing its best to help all the poor countries. I don't think it's that. Then there is another issue which I find really confusing. So I was watching a documentary about Pakistan and the Muslims, how strongly they feel about etc. So it's obvious that religion is really important. Islam. And a lot of the countries going with China are these Muslim countries. But of course, China, we keep hearing, is really bad to its Muslims. So how was that going to sit comfortably between all these different things? I think it's more a sort of common enemy for all of them, rather than actually having the same principles or really, being there to help each other. So I think it's a little bit, I find the whole thing quite sinister personally. I don't think it's the goodness of the Chinese that they're helping everyone, infrastructure and all the rest of it. They're doing it for their own good, and it's helping them massively.
Yeah, I think this Uyghur sort of issue about the Muslims over there, I know from what we read from all the press that we get and all the anecdotal sort of interviews that I heard on the BBC, they're very sort of heartrending and the sort of statements coming from China as to what they're doing over there seems to get less airtime. But I'm going along not so much by what is reported, on the press regarding the Uyghurs, but rather by the Chinese overall vision of for their own country, and the actions they're taking, and the actions they have taken have worked very well in alleviating poverty for 700 to 800 million people, which no other country in the world has ever done. So they are delivering on something which is the economic well-being for the whole country. Now, Uyghur, that whole region is the poorest in China. Western China is the poorest compared to the Eastern China. And Western China has all these stans, which are the old Soviet Republic places, the Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan. They're very rich in terms of oil and so on, but they're landlocked. And the Uyghurs, because they're west of China, they're not the economy is very poor there. What China is saying that they're doing is they're re-educating them so that they build up a force for factories and so on, and so that they can bring in factories and have labor who will then sort of be employed there. Now with the link to Pakistan and going right up to the middle of that Uyghur country, it's all the goods coming through this region into China and then moving on further afield. It seems to be they're trying to lift that region up. And the way that they're doing it, we may not all agree, and I certainly don't want that identity of the Uyghurs to disappear, but it seems to be a question of seeing how well we understand what's going on there and what is being reported, because we are already at war with China in a way, and the reporting that we hear on China is always negative. I don't think I've heard anything positive said about China.
That's again, I'm not sure that's absolutely correct, because yes, that's the case now for sure. But at the time of the coalition government, globalization was the big thing, and you're right that China took millions out of poverty, but I think they did it with the help of the West, because we were busy sending all our manufacture to China, which benefited them, and the politicians were sort of saying, oh yes, we're helping lift so many millions of people out of poverty. The fact that they were Chinese people was beneficial for China, but I don't think we've been negative about China, and that's why we have so much infrastructure here. Again, the coalition government was happy for China to come and do all sorts of things, and as you alluded to the HS2 thing, they were in everything, but now they're beginning to sort of flex their muscles openly, is how it seems to me. And I had no sort of pre-existing views about China. I thought they were really hardworking people who did really well. But then suddenly you think, well, is that really right? And Xi Jinping, looks like he wouldn't harm a fly, but then when he decides that he wants to be the rule as long as he's alive, you think, oh, hang on, this is not looking quite as nice as we thought it was. So that's why I have reservations. Whereas I know you're looking at the economic side, which you think is all very positive.
Well, I'm looking at it from the perspective of what a country needs to do to be able to sort of get better. Of course, when it gets better, it seems to be that the way that we are looking at it is a zero-sum game rather than a win-win game. And China is saying, we want a win-win thing. Although with this BRI that they're coming out with, they have invited the West to become part of it, time and again, but, West does not want to be part of it, although Italy has gone with them. So there is a different type of approach to managing the world economy, in world sort of governance. And I think we are faced with an alternative choice here. And we have seen that the last 70 years since post-World War II, although there has been a lot of gains to be had from it, yet it did not sort of deliver to the same extent of what the expectations were. So with Africa now being so poor, and of course a lot of Asia as well, the thing that sort of stopped for them growing faster was the conditionality that was put in for loans that was given or promised or that was available. That conditionality made it difficult for loans to be given. And if they were given, they were siphoned off very quickly by the corrupt leadership. Whereas this type of model that is being pursued by China seems to be, okay, we'll build you the roads, we'll put the money in, and you be a partner, and you then develop your business using a highway or the ports or whatever else that infrastructure we build. But it is incumbent on the country as well to run it. And we saw in the case of Colombo in Sri Lanka, they built a huge port which they couldn't manage, and therefore they had to revert. The Chinese took it as collateral for the next 40 years or whatever, and running it themselves. So they have those particular commercial agreements made with the countries, but it's again on the basis of providing some growth and prospects for the poorer countries. Like one case that I remember, I think it was either Romania or one of these places, which were, or Albania maybe, very, very poor country, didn't have any roads. So the Chinese said, okay, we'll build you a highway from your one city to another one. And they said, look, we don't have the money. And the reporter asked them, so why are you building it? So the prime minister of that country said, well, we're building it because we have to make an investment in order to grow. And okay, it is a risk. We are taking it, but we have to manage that in such a way that we don't sort of squander away the sort of prospects of a good business possibilities. So in my view, the conditionality that has which has stopped the poorer countries going in for more and more loans, which I agree should be there, the conditionality, because you see what has happened is, I can give you the case of Pakistan, where the Nawaz Sharif government and the Zardari government, they borrowed from the IMF and they siphoned off a lot of money abroad. And we saw that in the Panama Papers, the money stashed away abroad. So this other scheme that they've got with CPEC with China now is not on the same basis, because the money is going into the projects and not necessarily into the pockets of the politicians. So there is a different model to be had, and I think we need to be able to give some little credence to what China is trying to say. Look, this is an alternative way. It may not be the democratic way. It may not be the free speech type of model, but we still are going to be able to try and deliver something to uplift your people. And I sort of like that idea,
But I'm wondering if this lady is trying to say that China is overtaking America. And what is happening, that China is not the most reliable country. And it seems to be that it seems to make all the alliances now. We're not talking just about the economy, but also politically, with all the Muslim countries, with huge Iran and other Muslim countries. And maybe that, not just from an economical aspect.
Well, it's also made a friendship with Russia, because it's got a 40-year deal for quite a lot of things to supply gas and so on. So the bloc that seems to be forming in Asia is with Turkey, Iran, Russia, Pakistan, China, Qatar, as opposed to the other bloc, which is now India, which is coming in, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the other countries that are there. And the Emirates, the Gulf states there. So we'll have to see where who is going to be the long-term friend, because Pakistan has seen China to be a long-term friend and helped them out quite a lot. USA was a friend of Pakistan but fell out or even left it. Therefore, it's not considered to be a reliable friend. And it could be that the same thing might be viewed by the other allies of USA, that USA may not be a long-term friend, but also goes with the how suited it is for the time being, So this bloc is not necessarily just a Muslim bloc, because the Muslims are on this side as well, like Saudi Arabia and Emirates and Jordan and the other countries there. But the ones that are on the China side seems to be buying into that argument of, let's say, go for infrastructure, go for long-term type of friendships, and not necessarily use short-term gains to serve your purpose.
It's interesting, Shafiq. I mean, I think.
Hi, Doug.
Hi. Apologies for joining late. I'm with Nimi. I think that we have to be very cautious. I think, about the growth of China. I don't think that they are doing it for altruistic reasons. There is a very good geopolitical and economic case that they are building, and they are doing it on a very long-term basis, which again, we in the West are not used to. We tend to say very short-term interventions. They're taking a much longer-term view. But I don't think because of that, we should be naive about their overall intentions at the end of the day. I mean, you talk about the investment and rebuilding in Africa. Yep, I mean, very good. But actually, when you look at it in terms of knowledge transfer, as far as I've read, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, it has fundamentally been the lower paid and lower skilled jobs that have been available to the native populace. The higher skilled jobs still are carried out by Chinese. And in terms of the longer term investment in building the knowledge base of that country, there is still a huge dependence on those countries on China. So I'm not entirely, I mean, there's faults on both sides. So I'm not sort of demonizing China and saying that the West is wonderful by any manner of means. But I think we have, personally, I feel the need to be very skeptical and cautious about China's intent, because I think it is going to form a very dominant power bloc in the future. And without the international institutions that you talked about, like the UN and the Security Council and that, which, as you were pointing out, are being weakened by increased populism in the West, I think that means that we are going to have a very, very dominant operator on the world stage, which I'm not entirely sure is benign, as you are suggesting sometimes.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I don't think we can write off China as a friend, an altruistic sort of country. I think it's going to do something that is primarily first in its own interest, and secondly, whether that sort of is sustainable or not. I believe that the fact that they wish to belong to the multilateral sort of world is an indication that they want to be part of a larger whole. I think it's through these multilateral organizations that one can influence China and be able to do the work or expectations that we have from other countries, recognizing that it is becoming a very, very much a stronger country. In fact, in the next 2-3 years, some people say that it is going to overtake the economic sort of primacy in the world, away from USA. And I believe the way that the rest of the world has got to do is to bring China in and not keep it out. And I think the policies that are being pursued are
no, I agree.
more, to keep it out rather.
Yes.
Yeah. About the vaccines you met, Shlomit, the vaccines you're talking about, I've seen that there are a number of vaccines that are being developed, but none of them have shown much of a complete success so far because they're still undergoing trials. And I think I read somewhere that some of them are quite risky as well. So we've got to give it time, I think, for a good vaccine to come up. And from what people tell us, that it's going to take time. Secondly, this COVID also changes its nature, apparently. It is not the same in every place. So it may also bring to the complexity of having to develop a vaccine that kills off all varieties of COVID-19.
But how do you know that COVID is changing?
Well, I read somewhere that the COVID of Italy was quite different from the COVID that we have.
Wow.
Yeah, so it seems to me, it's, yeah, you were saying, Giselle? You can't hear you.
You're muted.
You're muted, are you?
Yeah.
Unmute yourself.
I have read that as well, that apparently the scientists are saying that the COVID virus has mutated since it first came on, I don't know, December to March, and it's now, it's mutating all the time. So it is quite different now. And the vaccines may have to be different as well. And I think there seems to be a lot of problems that the vaccines don't seem to last that long. Some of them might only last a few months. The other thing that I understand in other research that with vaccines is that they need to test it for at least 2 or 3 years. I wish Maureen was here; she's the GP. But you can't just give a vaccine. I know with other research they've done, they don't know a year or 2 or 5 years after you've given a vaccine, there could be the most terrible side effects.
The other thing I think is that this corona thing is some of the crowns are missing on some, and they're saying it's weakening.
That's right.
Okay,
That's
which
right.
is why there's not so many people are dying now, which is true, but it is mutating all the time. So I totally agree with Giselle. How are they going to actually create a virus? It's not one size fits all. It's a big issue that they just don't seem to be discussing. I don't understand why there's this big vaccine rush. Yes, I understand why, but it's not going to work.
So how did they say that in Oxford, and in fact people from abroad have said to me, in Oxford they've found the vaccine?
They have found the vaccine, Shlomit, but it needs at least I can't imagine less than 2 years of testing. How do you know that after taking the vaccine, a year after you're taking it, some horrible side effects might develop? They don't just give someone a vaccine. Do people remember that what happened in Northwick Park Hospital with those students who had volunteered to be given a vaccine or some medicine or something, and they were in intensive care. I think 1 or 2 of them died, and there were a couple of them, 2 or 3 in intensive care. They nearly died.
Yes, they did. I remember it very well. They were paid for it, weren't they?
That's right. Yeah, well, that's what happens with the volunteers. You have to have volunteers to test it on for at least 2 years. I think usually it's 5 years, but they may want to hurry it up with this one.
I'm on your side, Giselle, on this.
Yeah.
I mean, how many of you are going to be ready to accept and be vaccinated when you don't know the side effects and you're perfectly well?
I'm not going to have the vaccine.
No.
That's a good question. I don't know how many of us are going to actually go. sometimes the solution may be worse than the disease, as they say.
I think that will compromise our immune system just as badly or worse. You know, I'm sort of a bit institutionalized at the moment, and I'm sort of happy to just be sensible for the next year and not go too far and not put myself in public places. Yes, you know, go over to friends and stuff, but to try and be sensible. I'd rather do that than have that vaccine. I absolutely don't want to.
Yeah, I don't know if any of you had a test done. Did you?
I did.
You did?
Did you?
Yeah, I had a test done as well. It came out negative. I waited for a few days. It didn't give me the response until I realized that I had to register as well. So then it came back immediately, the test result.
What happened with me was that I'm on this COVID-19 where you report every day whether you've got it, you haven't got it. And I woke up one day and I felt under the weather, and I sort of just reported it. And then I got an email from them to say, go to have a test, and where you go onto the government website, just put that you're a volunteer. And therefore, they then gave me a code and said, do you want to go somewhere? I went to IKEA, right? And I got my test results the next day via email. And they said, you can go back to work. I'm retired. You can go back to work. You do not have COVID, and you're able to go back to work, and please don't worry, etc. So I've got a friend that had the virus, certainly had the virus, and she works as a volunteer, funnily enough, in surgery around the corner in Temple Fortune Lane. And the National Health Force, whoever it was, sent someone to take her plasma in order to test it, you know, to use for antibodies and what have you. And she didn't have any antibodies for it at all, because that's when they realized that if it goes for 3 weeks or longer, you can have no sign of it, you know. And this is where I'm totally on Giselle's side. You can get, I believe you can get it again, just like you can get the common cold again.
You can get it again.
That's what they're saying, yes.
Yeah.
You know, that's where I'm totally on your side here. I think exactly the same as you. Bye, Doug.
Bye.
See you next
Okay,
week.
bye. Bye.
And for you people who had the test, was it really unpleasant or not?
No, it wasn't. It was a thing down your throat first, like you know, like a swab down your throat, and then they put it up your nose. Okay,
Yeah.
wasn't that uncomfortable?
Yeah.
And
Now, one thing that I did was, you know, they wanted me to fill out an online form giving the history and all the details. And right at the end, they said, can we check your credit rating? And I said, yes, of course. And then they said, you're not eligible because it didn't, whatever it was. So then I called the number, and the number said, oh, okay, we'll just take your details, you know, over the phone and send you the kit. So I said, look, it's a waste of time to try and fill out that form, which is a lengthy form. So they should correct that system. Put that question rather than last right in the front. I think it has to do with whether you do it with your registered electorally in this address or another address, and that type of confusion, you know.
excuse me, guys, I've got to go. It's nearly 12:30, so please forgive me.
Yeah, go ahead. I think we've
next
gone
week.
beyond our time anyway.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for all for attending.
Thank you.
I'll
Thank
send
you.
you the clip once I've edited this.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you next week.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Shafiq, could you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, because I was trying to ask a question for about half an hour.
Oh, no, I didn't see anything. I can hear you now.
All right.
Go and ask
Okay.
a question.
I'll do it next week.
Okay.
All right, then.
Sorry?
Okay. God bless him.
Yeah.
Bye.
Okay. Okay. Bye-bye. Okay. Great. Great.